Hey friends, Jawa here, and today I want to talk about Path of Exile 2. Now, as you probably already know, Path of Exile 2 dropped yesterday, and the hype around it has been absolutely insane to me because I don't think I've ever seen people this hype for an ARPG since Diablo 3, honestly. And I mean, honestly, we all know how Diablo 3 turned out. Some liked it, some hated it. But ultimately, Path of Exile 2 seems to be generating the hype that not even Diablo 4 was capable of from what I can see. So this kind of preview or first impression of the game is for people who aren't really Path of Exile players of the original. But also if you're someone who's been looking at the kind of hype behind this and you're unsure if maybe you should purchase the early access or wait and see if it's, maybe not for you later on when it goes free to play. I kind of wanted to cover this as someone who kind of just took that leap of faith and let you know how exactly this game is for me as someone who doesn't play the original Path of Exile. I tend to play these kinds of games a little bit more casually. I don't take these kind of Diablo-like games very seriously. I just kind of play through them whenever I'm feel like it, or it's just something for me to turn my brain off and play. But with this game, Path of Exile 2, I saw some footage from a recent trailer, maybe about a week or two before it came out, and it actually impressed me a lot, and it mainly came down to what people were saying about it. And I felt like it might have been like a Baldur's Gate 3 situation. Baldur's Gate 3 was a game I wasn't initially super interested in. I thought it would be a good game, but I wasn't sure if it was going to be the game, if that makes any sense, but there was a lot of hype around it. But when it came out, I kind of just said, you know what, fuck it. I'm going to go ahead and try it out. And I went ahead and purchased the game, and it's one of the best games I've ever played in modern day history. So that's saying something. So I kind of started feeling the same way about Path of Exile 2. And so I decided to actually buy Path of Exile 2, since it was only about $30. It's not a huge buy-in, and give it a try. And to be honest with you, it kind of surprised me. The first immediate impression I got from Path of Exile 2 was on its presentation. They did such a phenomenal job with it. I don't feel like Grinding Gear Games is necessarily a AAA studio. Maybe you would consider them that now with the money they're pulling in, and as well as the fact that Tencent has a huge share in them. But my thing is that Grinding Gear Games has always come off as more of a smaller company who's just trying to make the games they love, almost like an indie company in a way. So that's how I'm going to kind of treat them as I kind of look at this game. Path of Exile 2, when it comes to the presentation, honestly blew me away. When it comes to every isometric hack and slash game on the market, I feel like Path of Exile 2 is the best looking of all of them. Again, I'm not a Path of Exile fan, and I'm not coming into this as someone who, was just trying to give props to it because, Diablo 4 bad. I really don't even care about Diablo 4 at all. And the whole genre itself to me isn't something that I take very seriously. So when I say I really do think this is like the best looking game on this market, I really do believe that. And it doesn't just come down to the graphics. I was running this game on high. I could have probably pushed the ultra if I really wanted to with my PC, but I just left it at the default. And the game ran at a smooth 60 frames per second the entire time, no matter what was actually happening on screen. I can't really say the same for Diablo 4 when it launched. When it launched, I had trouble running Diablo 4 in the sense that when I was running it, even at, let's say, the medium or high settings, I would constantly drop frames and there wouldn't even be too much going on. So the optimization here just feels so much better. I understand now that Diablo 4 is a lot better in that regard, but my point is that it's very impressive to me that the game is in early access and it's already performing so well when I went into it expecting the game to really have trouble keeping up, especially with my experience in the past with games from developers who are smaller and they make a game that looks so good graphically, but they have trouble optimizing it. That's not the case here though. Path of Exile 2 runs incredibly well. Even when the game screen is filled up with monsters and spell effects firing off and everything, it doesn't seem to lag really at all. Another part of the presentation I really want to give a lot of credit here to, in fact I would say it's probably the best part, is the sound design. The game sounds incredibly well, and I'm not just talking about the music. The actual sound effects in the game, whether you're, casting a fire spell or summoning zombies or whacking a monster, everything just sounds so impactful. It sounds really incredible, and the sound design is just spot on. This is one of the best sounding games I have ever played. It really immerses you into it. Not only is the sound design so good in the perspective of being immersive, but it's also so well done that you don't really miss anything. What I mean is there isn't really a point to where you feel like the sound is so overwhelming and overstimulating that information that's important to you is going to be lost in all of that. No, none of that happened here. When something important drops, or something important happens on the screen and maybe you're so busy fighting you might miss it, the game is very good at setting off little alarm bells or other things for you to tell that, hey, something has happened here, and you'll notice it. For example, if you're in a heated boss fight and there's a lot of monsters on the screen, you can't really see what moves he's telegraphing. A lot of times they'll also accompany it with a very clear voice line so you know what to prepare for. I also think they struck an amazing balance when it came to the actual color scheme. One of my biggest things when it came to Diablo is, while I did really enjoy the Diablo 3 art style, even though a lot of other people didn't, it felt very comic bookish, and I felt like I understood why people didn't really appreciate it as much. But going into Diablo 4, I feel like the game felt very muted, to the point to where spells and abilities didn't feel as good because everything was just so dark and dreary, right? And I feel like they took it too far in the other direction without actually understanding how to strike that balance. Path of Exile 2 does a really good job with this though. While yes, you have your dark, gothic, oppressive atmospheres, you still have areas that make good use of color. For example, there's this area in Act 1 where the forest is like made of rust from all the weapons and bodies left over from a horrible battle that happened there. And so there's this kind of color scheme of reds and dark browns, and it looks incredible and it looks great, but it still retains that feeling of something is very wrong here. At the same time, the spells look incredible. There's a lot of color and life coming from them. For example, your fire spells, the way they light up the entire area, or how channeling necromancer powers creates this kind of eerie green glow, but you can tell it very clearly when it's happening, and it adds kind of like this colorful artistic beauty to the game in between all this dark and dreariness. And on top of that, the monster design is very unique. You're not just fighting demons, monsters, and undead. I mean, those are there, but there's a lot of creativity put into a lot of the monsters. For example, there's these monsters that chase you that look kind of like babies crawling on the floor, but they have like blood red sacks on them and they explode when you kill them. Just a lot of the game's monster design honestly reminds me of a mixture of like Silent Hill all the way to Dark Souls. It's just really well done, very creepy, and whoever made these monsters has a very beautiful, twisted mind. Speaking of Dark Souls, let's talk about the actual gameplay itself, because I did kind of mention this at the very beginning of the video, but I usually play these types of games to kind of turn my brain off. However, Path of Exile 2 is quite challenging in the sense of like how maybe Diablo 1 and 2 were when you first start out in them, how the game world is actually much more aggressive and oppressive when you first start, until you start gaining some actual power to where you can put up some good fights. The monsters from the very beginning are very dangerous, and if you don't pay attention, you can definitely be taken out by like a stray range attack, or some monster creeping up behind you. There is a dodge mechanic in the game, like a Dark Souls roll basically, and you have to make very good use of that and time those right in order to avoid a lot of that excessive damage. And I will tell you that while I was playing a ranged minion class here, I did notice that, especially a lot of players were talking about in the chat, that yeah, they were really struggling a lot of times because they were playing like a melee character who doesn't have quite the equipment yet, or they're just getting absolutely roasted by a lot of monsters because they're not able to mitigate the damage properly. So rolling and making sure you are dodging out of the way of a lot of damage, and a lot of the boss fights are going to come down to you properly using the roll mechanic as well, in order to avoid getting blasted completely, because some of these boss attacks will one-shot you outright. My opinion on this is that it actually makes the game far more engaging than I've honestly ever played when it comes to these types of games. Yes, I don't really get to turn my brain off because I really do have to pay attention, but at the same time, I have to pay attention, which means that I actually am taking a much more active role than just using my mouse to run around and, click a couple abilities and the whole screen explodes. Now, keep in mind that this isn't a problem for me. I actually really do like the challenge that this game has been offering, on the simple basis that I just didn't feel like I got this as much from other action RPGs I get. They're either like a big steamroll or they're just kind of slower and you just gotta slow down. But with Path of Exile, there is a strong in between of the game is hard and there's some difficulty there and you have to pay attention to what you're doing, but also, there is a lot of that satisfaction of blowing up an entire screen of monsters. So that's there, but keep in mind, especially with boss fights, the game does not hold your hand. It can be very difficult at times. You do kind of have to look at it in the sense of maybe even like a Dark Souls mentality where you're going to probably die a few times before you learn the boss's mechanics so you can truly understand it and deal with it. It's going to be some of that trial and error involved, so don't get so upset if you're getting, slaughtered by a boss or something. It doesn't necessarily mean that the game is, overly punishing. I mean, it can't be that way, but I don't view it that way since I've been playing. I just view it as sometimes there's trial and error, and making mistakes against certain bosses will cause you to get punished very heavily. When it comes to the boss fights, they're really well done. The bosses not only look incredible, but the boss fights themselves tend to be actually filled with different various mechanics that you have to pay attention to. It's not like maybe what you'd be used to where you just kind of, smack the large enemy until it dies and avoid the occasional attack. No, this is full on. Pay attention to what the boss is saying, what the boss is doing, because the boss will absolutely stomp you into oblivion if you do not pay attention to what they're about to do, because they will blast you very easily. So you have to definitely pay attention to what's going on. But I think that's a positive because, again, the bosses are very fun to fight, but it's very satisfying when you actually finally down a boss. Another rewarding thing about the game is the actual ability on how you kind of build up your character. Now, everyone's seen how crazy the Path of Exile, passive trees are, how expansive they are. They look overwhelming, but those are very slow growing, and it's not really the biggest thing that you're going to notice when you're building your character. One of the things you'll notice is that even though you start out as one class, it doesn't stop you from taking abilities and spells from other classes and incorporating them in your kit. As long as you meet the requirements to use those abilities, such as the stat requirements, for example, you will be able to equip them. So in this case, I was able to mix sorcerer abilities with my witch. Because of that, I was able to come up with a very fun playstyle that I've been really enjoying. It's kept me kind of hooked. Basically, I use some of the sorcerer's fire abilities to generate fire on the map, which one of the passives that you can get from their sorcerer tree is that when you conjure up fire spells, it conjures up a bunch of skull minions, and these skull minions will attack other monsters for a short amount of time before they disappear. Now, the cool thing is, on the witch side of things, I have the skeleton fire bombers, and their special ability is they can detonate my minions on the screen and basically make them explode and do a bunch of damage. I can do that with the sorcerer flaming skulls. So basically, every time I cast a fire spell, I create these flaming skulls, which can then be just used as living bombs to blow up and kill a bunch of enemies. And it's a really incredibly fun playstyle that synergizes well. On top of that, the flame wall that I put up, my skeletons actually do additional fire damage because any projectiles that go through the flame wall actually cause that projectile to do additional fire damage. So on top of that, my skeletons are actually doing additional damage alongside the fact that they're able to help me blow up these flaming skulls. So there's a lot of synergy here, and you can work out a lot of crazy different things. So I will say this, the build potential in this game is looking to be absolutely incredible. If I can come up with that, I'm very interested to see what some of the more expert players come up with, because I'm sure they're going to be very crazy. I also really enjoyed the voice acting in the game. A lot of the characters are done really well with voice lines that are really impactful, and you really get a sense of the person that you're talking to, their personality and everything. So I really did also appreciate that. And I didn't really recognize a lot of the voice actors. Like I normally play a game and I recognize voice actors right away, but a lot of these weren't as recognizable to me, but they did incredible jobs. Now, I've mentioned quite a few things that I really like, but what about the things I don't like? I've gushed about this game a lot, but I think there's some things that I would like to touch on that I think are important because this video is tailored towards someone who's not really a Path of Exile player, but might be interested in playing the game because of all the hype. Number one, first and foremost, always online. The fact is that I can get disconnected from a server when I'm just playing by myself, and I mostly will just probably play by myself. It is frustrating. I don't like it when any game forces me online when I can play it as a single player game. So already that is something I dislike, but I do recognize that Path of Exile is treated more like an MMO in a sort of way. However, I will say this, while I did find that acceptable with the original game just because it was completely free, I didn't find that as acceptable here because I did have to spend money to play it. Now granted, there is a caveat here. The game will eventually be completely free to play just like the original. But if you want to get it on the ground floor and play now, it's not. Regardless, once you start introducing money and having to pay any kind of money to play a game, I do kind of expect if it's single player, then there should be an offline component. Second, addressing the microtransactions. There's already quite a bit on the store. And I understand that the entire game is playable for someone who purchases the game, and there's no real issues as far as like the microtransactions making someone incredibly powerful or anything like that. They're all like cosmetic stuff from what I can see. So I never felt like I had to buy from the shop, and I never felt like it was constantly thrown in my face that I need to buy from the shop or anything like that. If anything, it just felt like I was logging in and playing the game, and that was that. However, one of my concerns when it comes to microtransactions is something that kind of happened to Diablo 4. Which is all the cool stuff gets regulated to a cash shop, and none of the cool stuff is ever possible for your character in the actual game. Right now, I feel like because I just got through Act 1, it remains to be seen if that's going to be a problem. I haven't really equipped any armor that's impressed me or anything, and there's already a bunch of people walking around looking like they're just absolutely like gods or something, you know, and it does kind of take me out of the game a little bit seeing people around like that. Because the cash shop stuff, when I look at it, it's so extravagant, it almost feels counterintuitive to the atmosphere that they're trying to make. So that's another thing, is that even if I did want to buy something from the cash shop, so much of it is just so extravagant, I don't even know if I would be wanting to, because it clashes with the atmosphere of the game as far as I'm concerned. But that's just kind of my opinion at this time. But I do hope that later on there is some very cool looking armor sets and other things that you can get that you don't have to pay for. Another thing I don't really care for is I am playing a necromancer type class, and some of my minions glow green so I can tell who they are, which is great because when you're fighting other undead, it tells you which one are your undead, so you're not like trying to cast a spell on the wrong kind of enemy. However, not all of your summons do that. For example, the summoning of zombies or other minions aren't as obvious that they're your zombies. And so you end up in a situation where you might end up throwing spells at the creature you can't even hit because it's your creature. And that can be very annoying because when there's so much going on the screen, you can't always just take a second when you're being completely hounded and attacked. And these attacks really do hurt to try to figure out if you're shooting at the right thing. So I looked through the options and I couldn't find anything, but there needs to be some better ways to identify your own creatures on your team. Going into that same sentiment, there is a lot of visual noise at times on the screen. And while I did give props to how good the sound design is at picking out stuff, sometimes visually it can be hard to tell if you're hitting the things that you want to hit, or if the monsters you're trying to summon get summoned without looking at the top of your left-hand corner of your screen. Little things like that. I want the game to display everything as well as it can on the screen, because that's where I'm looking most of the time, especially when I'm trying to avoid attacks. So that's another thing that I kind of wish would be a little bit more clear. It's just visually, you know, what monsters are yours, what enemy monsters there are, and if some of your spell effects are going off, because some are very clear and obvious, but other spells are a little bit more subtle, and so it can be harder to tell if things like curse are still active, or if you actually hit the corpses on the ground for you to summon your bone minions, stuff like that. All I had to say right now, I just hit Act 2 in Path of Exile 2, and I'm looking forward to playing it a lot more. But I wanted to share my thoughts as someone who is coming at it from a perspective of not caring about the original Path of Exile and not being a huge action RPG player. But again, I think this game is really incredible, and if you are on the fence about it, you'll probably actually enjoy it. But this video is mostly to help people understand if they're actually interested in buying this game, or if they should maybe wait a bit longer and see how it is at free to play. But if you did enjoy the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. There'll be more content on the way. Let me know if you'd like to see more Path of Exile 2 content as well. And I will see you all on the next one. Have a great rest of your day.